want to take a moment now to welcome our WURD radio audience that will be listening into the Q&A as well. Again, I'm Stephanie Renee, one of the hosts of The Source, weekdays from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. And we are glad to be able to extend the wonderful conversation that you saw begun through the documentary. Can we give it up again just for all of the wonderful information that was shared? And so now extending that conversation and taking some of your questions as well. We are very, very familiar with the gentleman who will be leading the conversation. He is one of our prized resources here in Philadelphia and to the world. I know he also maintains a residence in France where he gets a chance to live this experience that you've seen on the screen in so many different ways, but also encourages folks from far and wide with stories to tell in their individual lives, in their neighborhoods, in our community, and trains them about how to make films that speak about these experiences through his organization, Scribe Video Center. So please put your hands together for Louis Massiah. And sitting next to him is the woman that we have to thank for this wonderful film, Paris Noir. And she gets a chance, as you saw in some of the clips in the film, to take people to these historical landmarks and to share with them the history that is associated with it through her Walking in Spirit tours in Paris. So please put your hands together for Julia Browne. And now we turn the conversation over to them.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure, I didn't want to walk out of here without saying my thank you. So I wanted to thank a couple of people who made this program happen. This program was put together very, very quickly. I called a friend of mine in Paris. Her name is Camille Rich. I don't know if anybody knows her, but she's from Philadelphia. And I said to her, I'm going to Philly. I've been invited to speak at Rowan University, and it would be great to do something in Philadelphia itself. Do you know anybody that can help me? And that was like 3 weeks ago. And she goes, ah. And then she got on it. Her and her cousin Naomi Nelson, who is here somewhere, right here, sorry, who's here, and me and Camille had similar experiences in France. We were both young mothers in France, and so we were bringing up our children. We were going along the same journey, and so we have nurtured that relationship for many, many years. So I knew that I could call her and that she would, maybe just, and so she did. She just pulled out the guns. And between her and Naomi, they managed to pull everybody together. So I just want to thank everybody that's here. And Naomi has a strong kind of connection to Paris as well. She was a study abroad student like I was at the Sorbonne, and she's back and forth like many of us who love Paris. So let me just say this. Thank you to Vernoka Michael, who is executive consultant at the Paul Robeson House, where we showed the film this afternoon, and that was really, really lovely. To Patricia Wilson-Aden, the executive director, and James Claiborne at here at this museum, and to Valerie Gay at Art Sanctuary, and to Sarah Lomax-Rees at WRD and all her wonderful team. And last one to Charles L. Broxson Afro-American Collection at Temple. And special thanks to them, and to Diane Turner, the curator there. So that is my thank you. And without all of these people, I wouldn't be sitting here, and so very, very thrilled. And one of the thrilling things for me is to be talking about African Americans who have made it to Philadelphia, and then walking backwards and coming to the places where they've been. So I've never been to Philadelphia before, but to know that, this is where Henry O. Tanner, his art talent was nurtured, Barbara Chase Rubu, and I found out today Alan Locke, and Ed Bradley, so many people. And so they, we've all had that similar journey going to Paris. What is it that draws you to Paris? So what brought me to Paris was I have been interested in Francophone French culture since I was a child. And you know, you don't really know where your passions come from, or you just kind of, oh, I like this, I'm kind of interested in this. And when I was 15, I said to my parents around the dinner table, I'm going to marry a Frenchman. And they went, because we lived in Canada in a small German community. And I mean, there were no French people around. And so, but it did happen. And it wasn't that I set out for it to happen. It's just, but by following the things that were of interest to me, I did a study abroad program in the south of France for 2 years. I moved to Montreal so that I could learn French, and then got a job with the airlines so that I could move around. And I went to France often with that job. And to be quite honest, I didn't really like France that much when I first went, but yeah, it grew on me. You get to understand, you know, they're different, and you just get used to them. So, and then I did get married, and like Camille, I had children, and then being more than just a visitor, getting into the French culture, the French consciousness, the French experience. By having children and putting them through the school system, that's how you learn what the French are about, right? Because you take your children to school and you see their relationship with their teachers, you see the relationship with their headmasters, and then you start to figure things out and you go, oh, that's why they have that kind of, you know, they bow to certain people and that, and you get to figure things out. And then I was teaching at a state school, I was teaching English, and then you see that the secretaries are definitely not going to have English classes with the middle managers, and the middle managers are not going to tolerate having classes with, or not going to have classes with the upper management. So there's that hierarchy thing that we hear so much about the French, and it's just little things like that get you into the French culture, to get you understanding it, and next thing you know, you're adopting things about the French that you like, and you're letting go things about your own culture, the culture you grew up in, and going, well, that doesn't serve me anymore. And so you become this hybrid. And it's a really fascinating journey. So you get to this point when you're, a certain age, and you look back and you go, well, I'm certainly not that person I was, those years back. And you see how a country and how the choices you've made to leave your own country. And I matured. I grew up literally in the French culture, and matured as a person, I feel. And it's not who I thought I was going to be, but it's pretty interesting.
What years were you living in Paris full time? I know you're back and forth now.
I moved to Paris on February the 1st, 1990, permanently, and I lived there until 2001, and then I moved back to Canada. I wanted to go back to school, and I'm surprised that I'm still here, but here we are, right?
And the tour business that you started and have maintained, could you talk a little bit about that? How did that get started?
So when I arrived in 1990, I didn't know any other people of color. And as I was married, you kind of get right into the French life, and your husband's friends are your friends, and to find another person of color wasn't easy, because you didn't really see them out in the street that much where we were living, or you had no reason to go. I remember one time going up into the African district, and there was an African woman sitting in front of me, and I said, bonjour, and she just kind of looked at me, and she goes like, do I know you? And I'm going, oh, and I thought, oh, well, okay, there's that. So there are boundaries that I didn't know about that you have to learn about, right? So it was an interesting learning process.
So I have to ask one film question. So you were the associate producer on this film. So what was your work? What was your role? What was your work in making this work, the film that we've just seen?
Okay, now I'm going to go back and answer your last question, because I realized that I actually didn't actually answer the question. So I was looking for other people of color, and eventually, 3 years down the road, somebody said to me, well, there's this professor, his name is Professor Michel Fabre. He has created the Center for African American Studies at the Sorbonne University, and you should take his course. So I said, okay. So I went, and he let me audit his course, and he became my mentor. He was the expert on African American studies, literature in France. And his most well-known book, that's kind of like a Bible, is called Black Writers in Paris, 1840 to 1960. And I took his book. He had a little book also that was called A Street Guide to African Americans in Paris. And I took it, I walked around the streets, and I discovered that Langston Hughes used to live in my neighborhood, or I lived in that Langston Hughes' old neighborhood. And so you saw that neighborhood on the street. You saw that tall building. Well, I went into that building, and I knew that I had, knowing a little bit how things were working by then, I knew that the concierge would go for lunch at certain times. So I figured I could get into the building. And this was before they had those digital codes on the outside of the doors. So I went up there, and it was just after lunch, and sure enough, she wasn't there. The dog wasn't there. So I went right up to the 6th floor, and there was that dark blue door with a little space under it. And, you read about Langston Hughes talking about the cold water flat, and it was probably pretty drafty because the gap under the door was about that wide. But it was just like a revelation to me, because all of a sudden, Paris is not just this big foreign city. It's a place where there's all this history. So I took the book and I walked around, and it was just like astounding, the amount of history that you're just walking through. So I just was researching more and more, and I didn't set out to do the tours, but people were asking me, what is it you're discovering? And I said, this person lived like in your neighborhood. And they said, oh, can you show us more? I said, sure. So I took them out on the weekend. And then an editor from Essence magazine contacted me and said, can you show me? And I said, sure. And I had my cue cards, and I was walking down the street, and I'm showing her this, and then people would say, well, we have relatives coming to town, and can you show them? And I said, absolutely. So on the weekends, I was outside of my day job. I started these tours, and it was absolutely word of mouth, because there was no internet at that time in 1994 when I started this. So people would come, and they would come there was an article in the Washington Post, and they'd come and they'd have the newspaper in their hand, and it's you, and it was so exciting, because you just sharing this with people, but we're all like rejoicing in this, and just walking around, and we belong here. We have so much history here that it was really like another home to us, right? When you go there, how many people here have been? So yeah, everybody's been. Okay, so you probably had the same experience. No? Okay. All right, so then that's how I started the tours. We do walking tours, we do bus tours, like private bus tours to the different districts. And it's not just, we don't just point out the sites, like this is where James Baldwin lived, this is where Miles Davis and Bud Powell lived in this rooming house. This is Richard Wright's house, and you can see the plaque on the wall. But we talk about the French history and what happened in that neighborhood at the time. We take you up by the Moulin Rouge and show you that just down the street, that's where all these 20s activities happened that you saw here. So you can relate the French traditional activities and entertainment with now this encroaching jazz, and you just wonder, and so it begs for conversation, like what was the relationship and all this, and it's really quite a lot of fun. So that's the tours we do, and I create itineraries also for people that are traveling, so I put the whole trip together from A to Z.
So before you answer the filmmaking question, I just wanted to add, Julia had mentioned Michel Fabre, a very important name. Michel Fabre and his wife Geneviève Fabre, two very important scholars. And what they did is enlarge the notion of what it is, what American literature is. So people so Faulkner was there in their study of American literature, Melville, but they brought in Toni Morrison. They brought in Toni Cade Bambara. They brought in Baldwin, Richard Wright. So very important in sort of enlarging the international understanding of what it means to be an American. So what did you do as the associate producer?
Okay, as associate producer, that role is an advisor. So when you saw me on the screen there, that was in 2002. And I had just started working with the filmmakers. They were just at the very beginning of making this series of films. This film was finished in 2016, but they had made a series before that, and starting around 2002, and it's a series of short films that are perfect for the educational field, like for teaching K to 12, because they're like 6 or 7 minutes long, and there's a 6 or 7 minute piece on the Harlem Hellfighters, there's one on Sidney Bechet, there's one on Josephine, there's one on the women's artists. So they had all that footage, and then people kept asking them, can you make like a documentary? And so back to the drawing board, and they had a lot of footage and material left, so they did that. But when they started working with me here, we became fast friends, and then I worked with them as an advisor. So all through the making of this film and the last two, I would advise them on, I think this is a good idea, or that's not a good idea, and we would go out and film together. So at this point now, I also do some of the promotion, and I take this film around to different cities. Like I think I counted, I must have made like maybe between 12 to 15 trips to the U.S. last year alone with this film. So we've taken it, and we take it to film festivals, we take it to schools, like a lot of universities, cultural events, that kind of thing. And this year we've been to St. Louis already this year, here, New Jersey. We've shown it twice in Paris. Last week we were in Paris showing it. So we're getting a lot of mileage, but the oddest thing is that the more we show, the more we hear, how come we've never heard of this before, and how come we've never seen this before? We take it to schools. We've taken it to schools in France, where even the kids, they're like, I was there in November, and they were, this teacher showed them the short clips, and these kids they're like maybe 11 and 12, and they're learning English. So they're using the film to learn English, and then they've invited me into the classroom, and in front of me, in groups of 3, they present a character, one of the people in the film, and they talk about them, and it's just like so extremely, extremely touching that this story is now being spread out. And we took it out to a community center out on the outskirts of Paris as well, and it was it was a community center that took the poster, took it down to the market in the morning, and distributed it out to the people come on out and see this film. The place was full, and the people are just going, why have we never heard this? Why don't they teach this in school? But there's many ways to learn information, right? So we all have a role to spread this, and I have a role, and you have a role, and it's going to get out.
So I know that we're on radio, and I'm just hoping that we get proper audio. Does anyone in the audience have a question? And you're actually going to have to do a little bit of exercise to come up to the microphone, or making sure that microphone is working.
Okay, hi. I just wanted to ask, I noticed that you had a lot of professors or commentators from Columbia. Why was that? Do you know specific people there, or?
That's probably just because they were the ones that were expert in that field that we were looking for. I hadn't really actually noticed that, but you're probably true. Yeah. Okay. I'm not sure, but thanks for pointing that out.
Yes, and if we could have the microphone over here.
Paris and France and going there. It's just an amazing experience. It's interesting to hear some Americans say how they don't like France and how they don't like Paris. And, you know, after having spent more time than just your typical tourist trip, it really, really, really touches your heart. You know, what it's like to live there, what it's like to be there. And I don't think Americans give it a chance to see the differences and our similarities. My question to you is, I think it's very interesting at the end of the movie, how they talk about the relationship with the French with people from Africa. And not to get on the issue, but I wonder from your perspective, just having lived there, how do you think Black Panther, which just came out, and I don't know if it's been there, would be received there? Mainly because when you think about it, the actors are mostly American or British, but obviously the topic is centered in Africa. So just kind of, you know, not knowing what the numbers are, the income from it, what would you think would be the reception of that piece there?
I saw it in Paris on last Saturday night. And I was like super pumped, and so was the whole audience. We bought our tickets in advance just to make sure we got in there. I had a friend who, it actually came out on around the 13th, so early in the week, and I had a friend who'd seen it twice, and she went to a kind of an old traditional cinema, and it was full. People, you know, out the door. When we went, there were people out the door, and there were people dressed up, you know, just like they were here. It is like something that there's a super excitement about it. And when we went into the cinema, right into the theater itself, they were handing out questionnaires to fill it out, two-sided. And I said, well, for sure, you're going to sit there and you're going to fill this out. But you know what? At the end of that film, we were all sitting there filling that thing out because we were all very interested and we all wanted to have our say. And because we sat there, we realized that there were the two extra pieces at the end. You know, we would never have known. But I think it's going to be one of those cultural pieces that brings people together, and it's something that I think we really need in Europe. We need, I'm saying this because you see in the film there was a desire to bring the Caribbean and the African Americans, and that has been a desire through, you know, since that time. And sometimes it worked, sometimes it hasn't worked. But then France has been going through, since about the 1970s, 80s period, when there's a questioning of, you know, what it is to be Black, what's the Black identity, and the people that are who are African, who were born in France, and still get asked, where are you from, you know, that kind of thing, is still very prevalent. And there is that question of where do we belong, and that is a major topic of discussion in France right now. What you heard about those riots that took place in 2005. You hear about, you know, the pushback against the Muslims. You hear about the social action that's going on. And there is this desire to put it in the faces of those who are resisting. We are French. You have to recognize us as French. Just because we don't look like you, or just because our origins are not like yours. In 1794, I believe it was, there was the Emancipation Declaration in the West Indies, in the French West Indies, where every person was declared a French citizen. In Africa, with the end of colonialization there, or the liberation, they then, who lived there, became French citizens to a certain point. So they have the right, but there is such resistance that, you know, there are anti-racism movements, there's all kinds of movements, all kinds of questionings, but a movie like this, for me, brings us all on the same page, because again, there's also pushback against the American influence. They say, Black Lives Matter is great, but we don't have the same history, so we're not, fighting exactly the same thing. So I think a movie like this is it changes the question a little bit. Like, what are our similarities instead of what are our differences, which sometimes has tended, I've seen it in meetings I've attended there, tended to keep us apart. So I'm hoping it brings us all back together. And I don't even know what age group this is going to apply to, whether it's going to be the role of the young people to make this happen. But there are many professors as you saw one or two here, who are French, Black, who are teaching in the United States and who are putting that forward here. So I'm just hoping it it's stirring up the pot even more.
Sir?
Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I think my question is more of a philosophical way of how we think. The Baldwins, the Coltrane's, and all of our brothers or ancestors that went over there because they left this hateful place, but many of them came back. What do you think the reason for that?
And so the question was a number of very important artists, ancestors who went to Paris but later came back. What do you see as the reason for that? Why?
It's true that many people went to get away from the racism and the segregation here, and just to get a breather, just to be able to live your life without that hassle. But it wasn't the only reason that people went. A lot of people went because it was going to be an opportunity to nurture their art, to improve their skills, to improve themselves personally. And for example, the artists, they had mentors in France. Like there's a woman who's from the Boston area. Her name is Meta Warwick Fuller. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of her. Oh, she's from here. All right, hit that one. So anyway, she, who her mentor was? Rodin the sculptor. She was taught by him, and he looked at her work and said, "Madam, you're an artist." This is like in 1899, and that's not going to happen here. She was not going to get that quality of teaching. Henrietta Tanner, you saw his story. So it was a chance to be in the global ring. Writers, the same thing. The writers, they went to improve their work, but also to meet and to share thoughts with others of the diaspora and others like them, and in a freer atmosphere. And the musicians, they didn't have to go in the back door, and they were celebrated like, Bud Powell, he would walk down the street in the 1960s, early 60s, and they would just applaud him. He'd be going through the market, and they'd say, "There's Bud Powell, there's Bud Powell." And and he had gone to the States, and he had gone to Paris with all kinds of health problems from the way he'd been treated and beaten here in Paris. But it was that appreciation. But why did they come back? Because after a certain point, they think about what is the goal of, what is the purpose of this art, this new status. Even feelings that I have about myself and my own self-confidence. What good is it in France? Let's bring it home and put it out and let others benefit from it. And so that's why a lot of people would have come back home. James Baldwin thought about that. Okay, it's time to go and just spread that wealth. You're welcome.
Yes, that's just about it. I really want to thank you, Julia Browne, and thank the African American Museum and WURD for organizing this wonderful screening and have the chance to hear you speak. So thank you very much.
Thanks. Before you go, I hope that you all were able to pick up the postcards that are outside on the table, and if you didn't, please pick them up. There's a postcard from the film with information on the back. You can pick it up, you can frame it, you can put it on your fridge, whatever you like. This one tells about the battlefield tours that we have created, so you can go out, you can go down in the trenches, you can see the villages where they fought First World War, Second World War. You can visit Josephine Baker's chateau in the south of France. You can actually walk through her chateau. You see her beds, you see her kitchen, you see everything about her, and you understand truly who Josephine Baker is. And this one, I'm sorry, this is going to be like a commercial break, is for my tour business. So it's inviting you to see Paris in a different way. All the info's on the back. And if you feel like you really must have more of this film, we do have the DVD on sale here. It's $50, but it's $80 on the website. And this book that we have just put out, it's a film companion book. And it's 83 pages, and inside, it's got the stories, it's got the pictures, but on the front, you see there's a little image down at the bottom. It is virtual reality hotspot here. So you download the app. It's all written in the back here, and then you'll see that on different places within the book, and you get additional footage. This one is $20, so we'll get that out at the front. And if anybody has any questions, you want to talk to me, say hello, whatever, I'm open. My information is on the back of this postcard. Yeah.
And thank you. And I just wanted to hand the mic over to Sarah Lomax-Reese, the General Manager, Executive Director of WURD.
Grand Poobah of WURD. So I want to thank Louis Massiah. He came through at the last minute for moderating the Q&A. I think all of us, like Francophiles, were like, oh my gosh, a story about Black Paris. We got to do it. We got to be there. So thank you very much. And thank you, Julia, for being here. Thank you, all of you, for coming out. And we've got tons of soft pretzels back there. Very, very, very French. You know, this is like high French cuisine back there. So please help yourselves, and please come meet Julia. She's going to be selling and signing and talking upstairs as we leave out. But stay tuned. Keep listening to WURD 900 AM, 96.1 FM. And thank you to the African American Museum, to Art Sanctuary, to everyone who helped to pull this together at the last minute. Naomi Nelson, there you are. Cami Rich, and it's great to work in partnership. And happy Black History Month. And if you aren't doing anything on Wednesday, next Wednesday, February 28th, from 10 to 11:30, we're doing a Healthy Aging Symposium at the Free Library from 10 to 11:30. It's free. It's on the Skyline Room at the Free Library, 1901 Vine Street. So come on out and learn some great information about how to age with grace and peace and joy. So thank you all for coming. Thank you guys so much. All right, bye-bye.